Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Today on the program, I thought I would start with an interpretation or at least a definition of something that I know many of us are familiar with. In fact, we're so familiar with, you almost might want to consider it to be hardwired into our thinking system. The particular word that I'd like to give the definition to today is the word sin. Now just settle with that for a minute. The word sin, I'm sure all of us have heard when we were little kids and we were going to Bible school and learning our religious studies about how we came into this world and we are all born with sin. And that apparently some Savior came along and washed us. If we just simply accepted this Savior into our heart, then we would be washed away of all sin. After all, He sacrificed His life to be able to do this very thing. Interestingly enough, though, let's take a look at the definition of this particular word, sin. Sin actually is an ancient archery Hebrew term for missing the mark. Just imagine, you draw an arrow, you shoot it toward the target, you don't happen to hit it where you wanted to, that's sin. You just missed the mark. Hey, we all make mistakes. But the fact that we have been so tormented by such a word over the years, over the centuries, if you will, have made us go into a point where we have felt extremely guilty about even sometimes our very existence and even sort of trepid, if you will, about the decisions that we make. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is someone just like a lot of us who live that very way, just feeling to herself, hey, what's going on here and how do I step forward and actually find my true divine self? She's going to be talking with us today about a wonderful book known as Leap to Freedom. It's how we can heal from quantum guilt. And I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Devrah Laval. Devrah, how are you?
I'm good, Daniel. Thank you.
This is a bold book to be putting out there. What's been the response for something like this?
It's actually been mixed.
I'm sure it is. Everybody has opinions and sometimes beliefs, and sometimes they just want to hold on to those, don't they?
Yes, that's exactly it. And it's quite different as I take it from a different angle than what we've been brought up with, and so it takes a little bit of unwinding to sort of allow yourself to believe any of it or even consider it.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know that you at one time were sort of an entertainer, if you will, a dancer and a model, things like that, and all of a sudden there was a sort of a breakdown, and all of a sudden you discovered the more true, authentic self. Tell us about that particular journey.
Well, when I was 29, I had what they call a direct experience of the truth, or another word for it is enlightenment experience of who and what I really am. And in this experience, I experienced a profound love that went far beyond the confines of just the body and the mind. And this was also followed by a miraculous healing. So it was quite an amazing thing that happened. And people said they saw a light pouring out of my body for long periods of time after this experience. And so afterwards, I spent the rest of my life studying with masters and teachers and gurus to try and integrate and deepen this and many of the other experiences I had. So that's kind of where it started. And in that experience, Daniel, I realized that we are absolutely loved and guiltless.
I agree.
So from that, it changed my life.
Mm-hmm. I can imagine it had, because take a look at, for instance, the idea that we feel guilty about perhaps a decision that we made or an action that we took. And maybe we knew a little bit better, or maybe what we did just didn't align with what somebody else perceived to be the truth of what we had done. So they decided to let us really have it, let us know about this, and the next thing you know, we feel ashamed of ourselves. Mm-hmm. So then we start questioning what that next step or that next choice or decision that we make is. And pretty soon you get to a point that you lack the confidence to even count on yourself to be able to navigate in this world. So you reach out to others that we believe are so much more knowledgeable and more experienced about what we do, so we don't make those same choices again. So therefore, we're living in a world through this shame rather than actually boldly going out there with the confidence of knowing that we were born with everything we'll ever need to live in life and that we're going to be loved regardless.
Absolutely. And that's what I, I myself was brought up Catholic. And so I think that made me want to understand this guilt much more deeply. And one of the things I did discover in my research is that the actions that we have taken are not it's not like we've sinned, or it's not like we've even taken those actions. It's guilt that's at the core of everything. Mm-hmm. Guilt is the separation that we're dealing with, and the actions come after that. So, and also the scientists are telling us that we're not the doer of our actions. So it's quite a complicated thing. But the truth is it's not that we're sinners because of our actions. If there's such a thing as a sinner, it's the belief that we've separated from our very self and from others. So this is really where the guilt comes in, is the belief that we've actually separated.
Mm-hmm. That where we were ever less than who we truly are, so to speak.
Exactly. So that's what I mean by separating from ourselves. We believe we're not worthy, we're not divine, we're not loved. And that's the root of everything. I think it's the root of war, it's the root of just about everything that we undergo in this world.
Now, as you've put this out there, you said that the responses were mixed. Tell us a little bit about that, and what were some of those thoughts or opinions that you had experienced from others?
Well, I think the fact that, the first thing that happens is when I speak about guilt, people say, yes, there is guilt. Yes, there is. You have to suffer for your actions. We are essentially bad. We are essentially wrong. We have to purify. We have to. It's that kind of belief system that people have that I've been up against. And those that don't have it are so relieved because they've actually experienced freedom from the idea of the fact that they're not guilty and that our actions we're not the doers of our actions, as science tells us, and that we're absolutely free as a result.
Mm-hmm. I found it fascinating that it was the idea of healing quantum guilt. Why the word quantum? Well,
there's a branch of metaphysics called ontology, and this deals with the being itself at the core, and the inherent cost of believing is what quantum guilt is. It's what we're looking at, and the belief that we did indeed separate from our source. And that's why I call it quantum guilt, because it's a deep metaphysical, ontological guilt, and it is our largest problem. And all the saints, all the mystics talk about this. It is the main reason why we suffer guilt and sin, is because we've believed that we separated from our source, from ourself, and that we're not lovable. And that's the main problem that we have across the board. Because what happens then is we project that onto others. So if we're not happy with ourselves, when we look at another, we're not going to be very uplifting of them either. So in other words, our greatest suffering is that we believe that we are two, not one. Mm-hmm. And when we believe we're two, we look over there, we see somebody else, and immediately there's a judgment. And that's where the real problem is the judgment and the separation from self and others. And that's why we have the wars and the conflicts and everything else. But if we knew that we were already one with everything, if we knew we already were absolute love, guiltless, worthy, there would be no reason to look over there and judge another, because another is us. And that's really what all the spiritual paths are about, is seeing that in each other.
Being able to come to love what you see outside of yourself as the cause of your suffering, so to speak.
Right, exactly. So that everything that you see on the outside is you. Mm-hmm. And if you're suffering, then there's always somebody out there mirroring that somehow. If you're not feeling good, I had an example where I was going to the gym with this woman, and she was tying up her shoes, and she was saying, "I'm fat, I'm fat, I'm fat." I said, "You're not fat, you're fine, you look terrific." And we get to the gym, and immediately someone marches right up to her and says, "You're fat, and you better work out more." And so she turned to me and she said, "Who was that?" I said, do you know her? And she said, "No, I don't know her at all. How dare she?" And I said, "Well, you have been saying you're fat a lot lately." Mm-hmm. So everything's, if we're just one thing, everything is there interacting with it in one way or another, including our fat. Mm-hmm. This is where we put our guilt. We put our guilt onto each other, our unconscious guilt, our sense of being separate and unworthy onto each other. We put it onto ourselves, our fat, our ineptness at work, whatever it might be. We project it outward.
Mm-hmm. It's pretty fascinating, too, when you take a look at the conditioning that, let's say, the American society has come to embrace at times. We live in a world where we seem to celebrate celebrity as the ideal lifestyle of what we all believe we want. And as we try to go out there and achieve that, we try desperately to do so, and we find ourselves falling short of that particular unrealistic goal because we're not authentically expressing ourselves. And therefore we feel that because we have fallen short that there is something wrong with us, that perhaps we're not worthy of the kind of happiness that this particular almost unattainable goal won't allow us to have. And that if you start removing that and realizing that you don't have to follow that particular paradigm, that you can have more freedom than you could ever imagine in a lifestyle that might even be envious of the celebrity that you're trying to pursue.
Absolutely, and that's the big thing here, is that when we remove these systems from our being, whether it be psychological, whether it be political, whether it be the movie stars and that whole system and the way everybody's projecting outwards, whatever it might be, when that gets removed, then we recognize then that we are free, and we've never been guilty.
Now, what would you suggest to our listeners as they come to leap to freedom that they can do to begin to move themselves away from what almost seems like a hardwired belief?
Well, there's a couple of things that I've discovered from science that I think is really helpful in that we get to see that it's not just the mystics, it's not just the saints, it's not just the religious or esoteric religions. It's also science that's looking at all of this. An example is, according to science and spirituality, there's a belief that we have that we're the doers of action. And according to science and spirituality, they say we're not the doers of action. And Ramana Maharshi, who's a great Indian master, has said, "The force that brought you here knows every action the body needs to take and will see to it that it takes those actions." Now, the scientists, on the other hand, have been saying the same thing. David Hume and brain surgeon Benjamin Libet, as well as others, say that it takes a split second for the brain to react and for the mind ego to take possession of the thought and claim it is my thought. So in other words, it's already happened. You have not done the action. The action's already happened. You're just claiming it later. And so they're also claiming there's a sense of no free will here. That it's all just in play, in a sense. And Buddhism, in the Nirvana Sutras, they state, I'm not the doer. I'm not the doer of action. And the core teaching of yoga, even, just yoga, is that I am not the doer. So when I researched all of it, it seems to be the theme in everything, is that you're not the doer of your actions.
Mm-hmm. I remember there was a guest that I had on a program some time ago, and it was really fascinating to consider this, and he says, God actually created mankind because God loves stories.
Yeah.
And when you consider that, we're each a very unique book. Some of them might even seem the same in their themes, but the fact is, you're a story just coming alive, As the late Alan Watts would even say, is that, you are simply the universe becoming consciously aware of itself. And to think about something like that, to realize, it's pretty hard to make some mistakes. I mean, we know inherently what the right thing and the wrong thing is based on the fact that would we want that experience to happen to us? And you see sometimes through the Bible the inherent wisdom that is there about just good living. You don't go out and harm others because you wouldn't want that to happen to you. You wouldn't want to take from someone else because you wouldn't want that to happen to you. Real basic things that, if you just kind of get along and you come to a place of giving, the fact is that it returns, as we know, 10 and 15 and 20-fold, and it makes life real easy and effortless. And the fact that we believe that life has to be a struggle sometimes, for many people, in fact, is the real true illusion itself. And that's what made this really such an enjoyable read, is the insights that you give that show validation that this is so true.
Absolutely, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing. I mean, when we look out there and we see another with a good light, we see them as innocent, basically. All we have to do is think of how much that other person struggles, just as we struggle. It's just the way it is. Then we have compassion, and when we have compassion, we want to do good actions. We want to be a kind person. We want to be loving, and we want to uplift the other person.
Mm-hmm.
But because we see them as separate, we look over there and we go, well, I don't know, they look different than me, and they're doing better at this than me, but we never know what struggles a person has to go through. We never know what suffering they go through in their day-to-day life. And really, when we come down to this level of understanding, all we can do is feel compassion for each other.
Very fascinating to know that, too, that we have opportunities consistently to be able to clear away the illusions that we've put onto ourselves, as you were mentioning earlier about the idea that a person, if you're going to believe in the separation, that outside of you, they're doing that, I would never do something that horrid individual. The fact is that you're looking at an aspect of yourself you don't like very much. Is that kind of the way to look at this?
Well, this is the way to look at it.
Well, it just reminds me, and it's something that I know our listeners, as they've listened over the years, have heard me say this, but I remember there was a fifth-grade teacher, and he had said one time, be very careful about pointing your finger and blaming someone for the situation that you're in, because you'll realize that when you do that, you have 3 fingers pointing back at you.
Love that.
And, and then I didn't understand it, but over the years I began to realize you're 3 times more responsible for a situation that you are involved in than you are for the situation that you're pointing your finger and blaming.
Absolutely. Oh, that's so great. I love that.
So, and I've come to realize over the years that the more you take 100% responsibility for everything that happens in your life, the easier it gets.
It does. It really does, because Because we're living then. We're living life. We're not separating from life. We're living life. We're constantly forgiving each other in one way or another. In my book, I have a section called Quantum Forgiveness as well as Quantum Love. And quantum forgiveness is the big forgiveness, meaning that in order to forgive quantum guilt, you need a quantum forgiveness in that you see to the very core of that person over there. And when you see that, you see it's you. And then you see their goodness and their innocence. And I had to go through a forgiveness with my mom, and that took a lot of time, and it was difficult, but I really felt at the end that I had actually healed that in myself. And then naturally, she started being so loving and kind, and it's just a natural flow of life. Mm-hmm. When I was holding anything negative towards her and judging her in any way, of course she was going to act it out. And when I forgave her at a real level, not just a superficial thing, but it's just, you've got to really get down to the humility in there, because the things that we do to each other, it's not so great. Mm-hmm.
Well, for instance, take a look at the fact that in our country we have the highest rate of incarceration of anywhere else in the world.
Yeah.
And it's even more fascinating to realize that it's more than some 60% of these people are behind bars for nonviolent crimes. Mm-hmm. And that there was even a trend where there were judges on the take who were actually getting kickbacks for people who were arresting teenage kids for very minimal, possessions of drugs and throwing them in jail for like 2-3 years because these judges were getting kickbacks. And, of course, eventually they were caught and shackled themselves. But, you realize, and there are some interesting documentaries out there that are starting to re-examine the fact that, this is something that really isn't working very well. And even furthermore, I was remembering watching how there was this town that basically was becoming like Tombstone, if you will, the tumbleweeds rolling across, no job opportunities, anything like that. And then all of a sudden, they decided, not the town itself, but apparently the federals decided, we're going to go ahead and we're going to build a prison here. All of a sudden, that became a real boon for the town, and everybody was excited. And I said, do you realize that your livelihoods are now being reignited by the fact that you're about ready to put up a structure that's going to take away the very light that you guys are claiming? Pay attention. What's going on here with your thinking?
That's so great. There's a study that I came across where it was a tribe in Africa. And what they would do is, if there was somebody that did something supposedly wrong, they would put that person in the center of the circle, and the whole tribe would circle around them. And what they would do is they would say to the person, give the person their best qualities. You are excellent at this. You are good at this, you treat people well. So they would go around the circle and they would tell that criminal in the middle all the good things about him, her. Mm-hmm. And apparently they had great success.
Well, think about us growing up. School wasn't very, very kind to too many people, was it?
Yeah.
Telling us about what we're not doing right. I don't know how many times I got to know not only the principal, but also their family and their relatives and everybody else. But it's like I was telling someone one time when they got concerned about a little bit of trouble that came into their life, I said, you know what, don't worry about it. How could you not worry about it? I said, I've been in trouble so much, to be honest with you, it's pretty entertaining.
Well, that's the thing. It's because you know yourself, you know others.
Right. Now, tell us how has this transformed you in being able to release all of this, or at least making its best effort anyway?
Well, I would say best effort. I think it's something that arises a lot.
Mm-hmm.
What arises, and it's not who we are at all. It's not at all to do with us. It's just what arises in consciousness. And well, in my book, if you read it through with an open heart and open mind, sort of thing, it can topple the illusions. That's what people are telling me, the ones that are getting something from it, and they say they have these deep aha moments. And I had that while I was writing the book. I would all of a sudden have these huge aha moments, and what they were was, again, the dissolving of these systems that we have believed ourselves to be in, when in fact who and what we really are have nothing to do with that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the big thing. I think that's the big thing about this book, is that if you really go into it deeply, you recognize that, oh my God, I am free. I've always been free. And what was this other thing? It's almost like you can't limit yourself to the confines of logic. Like the logical does not define us. We're something much larger and something greater, and something so filled with light and love, and so gifted and talented, and so much is not empowered in our world. And it's about empowering ourselves and each other, and if we don't do that, all we have is suffering.
Mm-hmm. And as you say, when guilt disappears, enlightenment dawns. And when you have that happen to you, you're in for a pretty big roller coaster ride, aren't you?
Oh, yeah.
Now, your website is Devrah Laval. That's Devrahlavl.
DEV as in Victor. DEV.
Yeah, that's what I said, V.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, okay. Sometimes you can get the B and the V, and there's a sin. That's a sin, folks. If you thought it was a B, no, you're mistaken, see. It's a V as in victory, right?
Right.
DevrahLaval.com. See, I wanted to show people, because it's interesting why I wanted to start the program by giving the true definition of what the word sin is, because, it's like psychology. If you ask people, what is psychology, they'll give you a definition that is not really what the original definition was. Psychology actually has a lot to do with the study of spirit. But we've misplaced that to be more of the study of the mind.
Of the mind, and the little boxes we get in, and all the labels that we get to carry around with us.
Mm-hmm. You are much more than your ingredients, is what Devrah is trying to tell you.
Yeah.
So go ahead and visit you at DevrahLaval.com. And your first book was The Magic Doorway into the Divine, which that's another website they can go to as well.
That's right. And that really goes through the journey itself, and the depth of it, because when you open up spiritually, people think your life is going to be absolutely terrific, but you have to hit the challenges. You have to de-identify from what you've been carrying your whole life, and that's painful sometimes. Mm-hmm. It's worth it in the end, but this book will support that, and it's also they use it at a college in mysticism for that very purpose. So,
I know, I find it fascinating. There was an acquaintance that I knew some time ago, and she started attending church regularly. Got excited about being a Christian, and I'm like, I'm very happy for you there. And then all of a sudden, it was a few months down the road, and she says, I've been going to church pretty regularly, and I don't find that I'm any happier than I was when I started. And I said, well, whatever made you believe going to church regularly would bring you happiness? And I think sometimes people have this thought that as they go on this spiritual path that somehow you're going to be in a consistent state of happiness. And I would think that, as you probably discovered, is as you begin on a true spiritual path, it begins to bring up all those things that you forgot were there to help you clean that out so you can feel the kind of freedom that I believe a lot of people are trying to seek.
Absolutely. And walking through it is the only way, because when you come out the other side, you really can imbibe some of the things I'm talking about, where you can see each other with divine eyes, where you can have the compassion.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like being in the fire. You're being cleansed in the fire. That's one of the ways that the saints describe it, the fire of purification. But it's not just, you're not having to purify anything out of you. What you're having to purify is the belief that you've separated, or the belief that you're not a full being. Like, for example, a lot of people have heard the saying, you're not a spiritual being or you're not, rather, a human being striving to have a spiritual experience. You're a spiritual being having a human experience. So that makes things very different. Mm-hmm. And what causes all our problems is our forgetfulness. When we forget that, it's instant suffering, because we'll just strive and strive to be better and be better and be better, and we'll never get there. It'll never happen. But if we recognize we are spiritual beings having a human experience, it becomes a joyous thing. That's where the freedom is, where we can go, let's just watch this movie go by. Let's enjoy it, knowing that I'm really somewhere else, and I'm really okay, and I'm really good. Mm-hmm. And that's where the purification takes you to ultimately, where you've noticed, or you recognize finally that I'm really just in a movie. Mm-hmm. As Shakespeare, he knew that.
Mm-hmm. The book is Leap to Freedom, Healing Quantum Guilt. Our guest today, Devrah Laval. You can find out more by visiting her at DevrahLaval.com, and that's Devrah with a V as in victory. Devrah, thank you so much for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program.
Thank you, Daniel. And I'm offering a free gift to anyone who buys a copy of Leap to Freedom. They can get my Magic Doorway book for free as a free ebook.
It doesn't get any better than that, folks. Devrah, thank you again for joining us.
Okay, Daniel, thank you so much.
You bet.
Okay.
We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. You can find out more. Visit us at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. We thank you for joining us. I'm Daniel Davis, and remember, live your day past halfway.